Great. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We're so excited to announce the release of our new toolkit, Building Worker Power in the Digital Age, Popular Education Tools for Organizers. The AFL-CIO Technology Institute calls it a must-read. The Center for Innovation in Worker Organization says this toolkit provides a, quote, a resistance pedagogy that meets this moment. This toolkit was created by PowerSwitch Action, Gig Workers Rising, and the National Network of Immigrant and Refugee Rights, with contributions from Ryan Garrity of the Athena Coalition, Sita Pena Gangadaran of Our Data Bodies, and Naomi Campbell of the Right Question Institute of Our Data Bodies. Today, we're looking forward to sharing insights from our panelists on why, when it comes to labor and technology, popular education is uniquely suited to help us build the shared analysis, strategy, and power that we urgently need in order to meet this moment. We have dropped speaker bios in the chat. I would now like to turn it over to our moderator, Seema Patel, Professor of Law at the University of California College of the Law, San Francisco, formerly UC Hastings Law. Seema, take it away.
Thank you so much, Natalie, for that very kind introduction. I'm so excited to be here, and let's get started. We're going to begin today with opening remarks from the inimitable Lauren Jacobs, the Executive Director of PowerSwitch Action, and the wonderful Maria Noel Fernandez, the Executive Director of Working Partnerships USA. So Lauren, I will turn it over to you.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Seema, and thank you, Maria Noel, for doing these opening remarks with me. We are thrilled. Both Maria Noel and I are so grateful for the outpouring of support for this gathering. We've had over 325 people register for this webinar. And so I just want to reflect on what that means when we see this level of interest. It means because we know sort of deep in our bones that we need to and definitely want to connect on questions that tie to the larger political moment in which we know is an important piece of what's happening and what we're seeing happen at the intersection of work and technology. So let's talk about that moment. It's on our minds, and I'm sure it's on everybody's mind, and that's just really understanding the ways in which the whole idea of democracy, and especially really leaning the question of whether we will be a multiracial democracy, is on deck in this moment in our country. And what we see happening with work and tech is perhaps one of the clearest examples of what is at stake. Right now in our democracy, right now at this moment, and we have to talk about also what can we do about this. I want to, just also be very clear when we're thinking about this, we're really talking about both people that are acting on the political scale, but also what this happens at day to day to many of our fellow citizens in the country. Silicon Valley, which is at the forefront of this, is one of the regions of the highest concentration of corporate power in the country. That is really sort of driving this radical transformation of the notion of work and also the notion of how people feel in a society or as part of a greater we. What we're seeing is that tech is now being used to push workers in ways that create ways for bosses to have greater power over workers and control over workers. So I just want you to think about this. We already knew before we were seeing the rise of all these new technologies, walking into work, it was like a mini authoritarian state. You didn't have a right to freedom of assembly, didn't have a right to freedom of speech. Like any labor organizer will tell you, right? Like, yes, there's sort of laws that enshrine that, but the day-to-day experience of what that is not felt by most working people. And now we have new technologies that are tracking people's movements to the second. Who are you talking to? How long are you spending in the break room? How long did you go to the bathroom? And also nudging people to act and perform in different ways in which we can't, I don't think we can yet fully comprehend the impact of that sort of lived reality for the amount of hours people spend in work day to day. Because I want us to sit with this. People over their lifetime will spend 90,000 hours at their workplace. So just absorb that amount of time in which you are having every second of your life monitored and in fact being nudged, prodded, economically coerced to behave and act in certain ways, and what that means on that micro level about what we start to believe we're entitled to, what we will accept, and what we will live with. I want to say this is why this makes this question of algorithmic surveillance and supervision so critical, and it's an issue on which we cannot afford to lose. So how do we meet the challenge of this moment? I want to pass to my friend and colleague, Maria Noel, to talk more about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. Look, what we believe we need is no secret, even though, frankly, sometimes it feels like it is the secret sauce. We win when we organize. And the building block of organizing isn't just organizers talking to workers, although we know that is an essential part of the process. But the actual real magic, and I think what motivates all of us every day, is when workers are talking to workers. And stripped to its essence, that's what popular education really is. And popular education involves trusting, truly trusting that when we bring workers together and support and accompany them in dialogue that allows them to share what they think, what they want, what they know, what they feel, what they need, workers will become the agents of their own transformation. And all of the narratives put out by the tech industry are just designed to erode that trust in workers and in all of us. What they're saying is that this technology is too complicated. What they're saying is that the march of technology cannot be stopped, that what we're living every day is inevitable. And they can say what they want, but we don't have to give in to believing them. Every single time we use this toolkit and the methods we're going to share today, I want us to realize that we are planting a seed of what new forms of democracy at the center of a small d democratic revival movement could look like. And when you plant a seed in the ground, for all our gardeners out there, you can't see it. But do you know what part grows first? The root. And when that root first emerges from the seed, it has a name. It's called the radical. In other words, seeds, one of the fundamental sources of life on this planet, both begin and are nourished from the bottom up. And as you engage with our amazing panelists today, we ask that you reflect on what are the seeds of democracy that you're planting in your own organizations every day? How are you nourishing them from the bottom up? And how can we all support the radical act of bringing workers into transformative dialogue with one another? Thank you for being here with us. Thank you for all that you do, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Lauren and Maria Noel, for those insightful and very inspiring remarks. I want to jump into our rich panel that we've assembled here today, and I'm going to posit my first question to Aiha Nguyen, who's the Director of the Labor Futures Initiative at Data and Society. We've heard a lot of public debate about the impact of data and AI-driven technology on workers in higher wage and unionized occupations. So I'm thinking here about writers, actors, athletes, to name a few. But beyond some talk of automation, we've heard less, I think, about these technologies' impacts on workers in lower paid sectors of our economy. And I'm wondering if you can help paint the picture of the types of impacts that these technologies are having on lower paid workers. In particular, for those of us who care deeply about workers' rights, what is it that makes these new technologies both so different and also so concerning?
Thank you so much, Seema, for that question. And thank you, PowerSwitch and others, for inviting me to participate and contribute to this really timely and important resource and webinar. So in answering that question, I think what we're seeing is workers in some industries are just more visible because they exist in a space where their image and art are closely tied to who they are. but workers in other industries are less visible or purposely made invisible. And so that's why we don't hear about those conditions like many in low paid sectors. And as a result, the consequences of automation on these occupations can be obscured, but that doesn't mean the impacts aren't as serious. Workers managed by algorithms, which are the data that's fueled by worker surveillance, collecting minute pieces of data about their every action and sometimes even their biometric information. Those workers face increased precarity in their workplace that can include erratic schedules that make it difficult for them to manage other aspects of their life, like childcare and schooling, which you see in retail and hospitality, work speed-ups that can cause injuries, higher levels of injuries on the job, and work quotas in more automated warehouses, for example. And the quotas can also lead to really rigid time constraints that may prevent workers from doing protected activities like using the restroom or having a 30-minute lunch break, and even basic accommodations for people who are disabled. And the algorithms are opaque and they can lead to very unwarranted disciplinary actions, including termination without warning or reason that leave like gig workers on platforms no clue what they had done wrong in order to be disciplined or even removed from their sole source of income. Fluctuating wages, that is something that we're starting to see more of, sort of algorithmically determined wages that are due to, again, algorithms determining that the same work should be paid differently that are prevalent among platforms. And finally, technology has also been able to use sort of a rhetorical argument so that employers can say, actually, we do not employ workers because they're managed and control. They don't control the workforce. It's an algorithm that's matching services offered by workers with customers seeking that particular labor. So some of these issues have always existed in work, but decades of advocacy and action by the groups here and many others have achieved hard-won worker protections like occupational health and wellness rules, health and safety rules, the 8-hour workday, a minimum wage that applies to all workers, tip protection, the right to organize. These are incredibly powerful tools. But what's happening is these protections are being eroded and the idea of a stable job is at risk. The challenge is that these consequences of job quality cut across occupation. So we're hearing about the artists losing their livelihood, but we're also experiencing, workers in service sectors and cleaning and security also facing a lot of precarity that are affecting their ability to maintain a job. And the technology is wrapped in new narratives about what work should be. It's making society question what work is valuable, what we should expect from employers, and what protections we should get from our government.
Thank you so much for laying that out for us, Aiha. I want to turn now to Wilneda Negron, who's the Director of Research and Policy at Coworker and also the founder of the Future of Workers initiative. Wilneda also wrote a really powerful, beautiful foreword to this toolkit that y'all will get to see. Wilneda, there can be a tendency to think of the tech industry as a kind of unstoppable Goliath. But your foreword strikes a note of hope. You write, and I quote, "If there was ever a time to believe in the promise and potential for economic democracy, we are currently living in that era," end quote. You also write that, quote, "As we stand at another crossroads of technological innovation and workers' rights, the timeliness and importance of this toolkit cannot be overstated." First, can you tell us what grounds your hope? And second, how do you see this toolkit and popular education as being well suited to take on these emerging challenges around work and technology?
Thank you for having me here. Before I share the optimism, I want to say that at Coworker, we spend a lot of time looking at the different technologies that are showing up in the workplace. And in the past 3 weeks alone, I probably have looked at close to 700 new AI workplace startups that are emerging. So it is absolutely a really dynamic and overwhelming and complex ecosystem that I'm immersed in pretty regularly on a week-to-week basis. But I think it's important to talk about, even as I'm in the weeds of studying these technological trends that are emerging, and historically have been so. You know, a lot of these types of intrusive behaviors can go back, you know, many 100+ years or the past 20 years. But even with the complexity of how the workplace is changing and the heaviness, I think that we all feel in the air in the country and around the world, and the issue areas that we work in, I can say that for those of us on the ground that really have the privilege to be on the ground, talking with workers, talking with communities, it is impossible to not feel incredible optimism at the same time that you are dealing with these like very complicated structural and systemic issues. And so I wanted to, in a forward, you know, ground us in the realism of the challenge that's ahead, but also strike a note of optimism, because while these are overwhelming technological advances and market and corporate control that we're seeing when we look at the market implications of these technologies, like there is we're also witnessing an extraordinary moment of worker power and solidarity. And workers are not just passively adapting to these changes. I think there's a lot of invisible conversations happening around dining room tables. I think for the opportunities that you can bring workers together, people are paying attention and they're asking questions. And I think if we can put them and create the environments where people can find each other, which is where popular education comes in, is not only where the radical is born, as Maria mentioned, but it's where the hope and the joy is needed to sustain how hard it is going to be to deal with this challenge is also born. And so you know, I have seen this talking with workers through California, Atlanta, Kansas, even around the world. And also, you know, the rise in union votes, success stories from the Writers Guild, from the National Nurses United, and also just all of the proactive partnerships that are happening between workers and researchers. They all serve as sort of concrete examples that if we can center workers at this moment and help them find each other, there is a supportive infrastructure that is coming across, like cuts across academia and many different sectors that are wanting to build on that energy. But you really need that initial seed that Maria was talking about. And so the hope is grounded in these real world efforts. And popular education, you know, specifically this toolkit, is, when I first took a look at it, is incredibly well suited for this moment because it centers workers' lived experiences. And that's really the only way that you can, again, begin planting that seed and help to leverage all the supportive, you know, systems and relationships that are coming around this moment, is by centering in workers' lived experiences. And it is through that centering through the toolkit that you really get the source of power. And so this particular toolkit is that a critical first step. Again, doubling down on what Maria mentioned, is you cannot grow a beautiful flower or a garden with many vegetables without the seed. And so we often overlook that kind of critical first step. And when I saw this particular toolkit, it seemed like it is a grounding that helps center the workers' lived experiences, but also begins to unpack and address these like broader systemic issues. So it's almost like an entrance to really beginning to think about how the digital lives are being shaped, our workplace lives are being shaped, and thinking about, it's an invitation really to collective action. And that's where my optimism lies. It's in the capacity of workers armed with the right supportive social infrastructure and the right knowledge and tools that are really going to build the power to drive the change that we need.
Thank you so much for that, Wilneda, and also for invoking Maria Noel's the image of the seed. It's reminding me of the sort of well-known quote that folks may have heard, right? They tried to bury us, but they did not know we were seeds. So I really appreciate you laying that out. I want to turn our next question to Ryan Garrity, who's the director of the Athena Coalition. Ryan, as Wilneda started to tell us about pop ed or popular education can be a very powerful tool. At the same time, it can be countercultural to the way that many of us came up organizing or organize now. Popular education is more resource intensive, for example, than sending a text or posting a paid ad. And its outcomes, I think, can also seem open-ended and uncertain. Organizers may wonder, why don't I spend this time organizing a march on the bus? So with that as background, I want to ask you two questions. Can you describe or explain what popular education is and what makes it different from political education, for example? And second, how have worker groups in Athena Coalition woven popular education into their work? What are some of the challenges and perhaps more importantly, some of the opportunities that you've seen come up?
Thanks, Seema. I'm really so happy to be part of this important launch. Minsu and I started talking about this at the very beginning of the project. I think when it was just an idea and the worker committee was coming together. And we started talking because, like in gig work, surveillance and automated management is very integrated into Amazon's business model. So I helped coordinate the National Amazon Coalition that was founded by the worker centers that were first to start organizing at Amazon. And what we saw early on in the Amazon organizing was that surveillance and automated management is like the scaffolding of Amazon's entire warehousing and logistics business model. All parts of management in this model connects back to that scaffolding. So we understood that this was possibly a weakness for the company because it's so central. And really early on, workers started to organize around this and fight for something different. So we came together to look for policy, legal, organizing, media hooks. We were looking for cracks that we might use. And so to do that, it was really necessary to sit with workers and look at it all together from every single side, explore it from different viewpoints, to understand, like, how do we see the system? What's the story we tell about it? What are the flaws? What are the opportunities? And it was really important in our coalition. We had strong anti-policing, anti-surveillance groups that had done this work intentionally with community groups, groups like our data bodies. So a number of us at different times, we sat with workers at United for Respect, in person in St. Louis with Missouri Worker Center. And like the idea was not to educate workers. The idea was that these systems are incredibly complicated and workers are the ones that have intricate, intimate knowledge of the systems. So in order to take an exploration to find cracks and opportunities, we had to sit with the people that understand the guts of these systems, like the people that interact with them, that game them, that study them every day when they go to work. So for me, that's what popular education is. Like, this is a thing not any of us fully understand, and we need to sit and figure it out together, bringing everyone's perspectives. And I think like this work only makes sense if it's connected to a campaign and organizing that's about winning something material from the company or through policy. So in terms of challenges, like there are lots of challenges in organizing against mega corporations, but the big challenge is that as a field, we are way over invested in policy that is disconnected from organizing. And I know Gig Workers Rising and Athena share that view and are trying to change that. And I'd love to get more into popular education. Our data bodies and allied media projects have a long history of doing pop ed around technology and surveillance. And maybe we'll get into that in the questions.
Thank you so much. So inspiring to hear about, and yeah, you're speaking my language and probably a lot of people here, the language of a lot of people here. I want to turn it over now. We've been hearing about the toolkit, so I want to turn it over now to my colleague and friend Minsu Longeroux, who's a senior staff attorney with PowerSwitch Action. And Minsu is going to provide us with a brief presentation of the toolkit itself, the context in which it was created, as Ryan mentioned, the topics covered, and importantly, how organizers can use it. So Minsu, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Seema. I'm going to focus primarily on two questions relating to this toolkit, the who and the what. So first, the who. So popular education is a collective endeavor, and so is this toolkit. At its heart, this toolkit was the result of a year-long partnership between PowerSwitch Action, a national network of grassroots organizations, and Gig Workers Rising, a Bay Area app-based driver organizing group. The toolkit workshops themselves were developed during monthly 2-hour in-person meetings with a group of a dozen or so app-based drivers who formed a digital rights leadership team. These drivers, including Mariana, who you'll be hearing from in a moment, are also co-authors of the toolkit. The toolkit, however, is also a tapestry in which you can see many different strands of our movement coming together. So for example, the toolkit was co-authored with the National Network for Immigrant and Refugee Rights, who of course published the foundational Bridge Popular Education Curriculum. Contributors also included Ryan Garrity, director of the Athena Coalition, Sita Pena Gengadaran, co-founder and co-lead of Our Data Bodies, and Naomi Campbell of the Right Question Institute. We also benefited from an incredible team of advisors, the Technology and Work program at the UC Berkeley Labor Center, Coworker, Tech Equity Collaborative, Connected by Data, the Center for Labor and a Just Economy, Data and Society, as well as Seema Patel of UC Los San Francisco. And there are many others who lent their support in countless ways. The AFL-CIO Technology Institute, Andrea Dellendorf, the Center for Innovation and Worker Organization, the National Employment Law Project, the People's Tech Project, the UCLA Labor Center, and the Labor Research Action Network Conference, to name a few. So for everyone who contributed to this toolkit or who later uses and adapts it, this toolkit is yours. It only exists as a result of your shared efforts, and I want to express our profound gratitude to each of you. Now I'll move briefly into the what. At the core of this toolkit are 8 2-hour workshops that contain modular popular education activities, so organizers can pick and choose between them depending on the needs of their particular campaign. Roughly speaking, the workshops move in an arc. The first 2 workshops are intensely focused on exploring workers' personal experiences of technology in the workplace. They invite workers to explore connections between the work they perform with their physical bodies and the data that businesses, owners, and corporations extract from them to exercise power and control. Participants also share everyday strategies of resistance. The next few workshops cast their gaze one level outward to workers' experiences in the larger community. The third workshop, for example, offers participants tools to engage work and technology subject matter experts, as well as decision makers, and hold them accountable. The fourth workshop explores participants' connections to the history of corporations' use of data to surveil and control workers, and to workers' own histories of resistance. In the fifth workshop, participants map and reflect on their own experiences in the tech industry supply chain, both in their communities and beyond. The last few workshops widen the lens further, exploring connections between workers' individual and community level experiences to more global themes like connections between the tech industry and migration, human rights, and cross-movement solidarity. Films, poetry, and image theater are also incorporated. We take seriously the invitation of technology scholar Ruha Benjamin of the need to seed a collective shared imagination that's rooted in solidarity and interdependence. One theme throughout all the workshops is that technology is always being explored through the lens of participants' social reality. their personal experiences and the knowledge they've accumulated with work, class, gender, race, migration status, and community. In this way, we frame the dialogue around these workplace technologies, not as one which is like technical or technocratic, but rather one that is fundamentally political, fundamentally about collective questions of power and purpose, and therefore a dialogue in which, as members of a community, we all have the right to fully participate. I'll close with the words of author and Afrofuturist Octavia Butler, who was a source of inspiration for this toolkit. She once wrote, "There is nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns." I'd like us to try to think of each of the new ideas and forms of knowledge sparked by workers and community members using this toolkit as a potential new sun. And I hope that by using this toolkit, you'll be able to find new suns just like we did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Min-Soo. Seeds and sun, y'all. I hope you are feeling the energy, and I'm so excited for folks to get to actually see the toolkit. I want to introduce and turn us now to Mariana Porras. Mariana, you are an app-based driver, a member of Gig Workers Rising's Digital Rights Leadership Team, and you're a co-creator of this toolkit. I'd love for all of us to be able to learn from your experiences with the toolkit. So can you start by answering sort of first for you personally, which workshop in the toolkit was most memorable or meaningful and why? But you're muted. Unmute.
Hi again, this is Mariana Porras, excited to be here. And yes, so my favorite activity was the timeline activity. We posted papers of different kinds of historical events on the wall. You could see employers use data to control workers starting from slavery. For example, corporations always have the same goal. They want to find different ways to manipulate workers. They want to keep you in working conditions that do not rise above a certain level, And what you see doing these timelines is how these patterns are being repeated in the now and digitally. You can see how there's always a run-up in which these corporations are trying to get rich quick. All they're worried about is their bottom line. It's upsetting to think that this has been going on since the beginning of time, no matter how much change is trying to come in. But just like some people who came before us, we're always trying to move forward. We need to move forward too. For me, when I think about what it means to move forward, I keep doing this work, I remember the phrase, walk by faith, not by sight. To me, what that means is I trust in going with the flow while creating the flow. It's an inner knowing. I trust that what needs to come to light will come to light when it is time. There are a lot of doors that aren't open yet, but this toolkit and workers coming together can help us open those doors. When we use this toolkit and come together, there are all kinds of things that we can discover together, dissect together, and work on together, like algorithmic wage discrimination. I and other drivers have been seeing these patterns for years, but now there's a word for it. And people who are not drivers are starting to understand what it is. They are starting to see why it's wrong and want to do something about it. Sorry. And people who are not drivers, sorry, that was that. Sorry, that was the end of my answer.
That's okay. Love to hear more from you in a little bit, but thank you so much, Mariana. It sounds like one of the main themes of the toolkit really is change. So maybe I'll put this next question to you. What are some of the new questions, ideas, or strategies that emerged for you personally in the process of actually developing and using this toolkit? What did you discover in the process? What shifted or changed for you, if you could speak to that?
Okay. Getting a group of workers together to start dissecting this data and these kinds of technologies is so powerful in terms of what we can do to hold these corporations accountable. On a personal level, I feel more confident. I have so many ideas. In terms of strategies, I'm confident that this toolkit will bring about a more just work environment. The conversations that workers using this toolkit have with one another are not normally the conversations they have. Bosses don't like it when we talk to one another. And especially as an app-based driver, you're so isolated. We're hired as independent contractors. We don't work in an office with a lot of people. and yet we have similar set of experiences. We all have different thoughts about those experiences. So when you bring drivers together so they can start talking with one another and so they can build trust to exchange information and talk about their experiences, it opens doors. It's a different kind of conversation. You're not trying to convince someone else of something. Instead, you're trying to see what you can learn and what kinds of ideas can be generated by talking together as a group. You're bringing together people who don't normally talk with one another. That in itself invites new ideas. That opens doors to change.
Thank you for that. There's so much I think we can learn from your experience, which motivates then my last question to you for now. What do you think is the most important thing for organizers to keep in mind when they're doing these kinds of pop-ed workshops with workers?
The thing I would want organizers to keep in mind is that the possibilities are endless when you're doing these workshops. There are so many minds in the room. And each mind brings its own unique possibilities and perceptions. Just think about it. When we went into this experience of creating this toolkit, we all came together. We didn't know what would happen at the end. But then you go off of what you took away from one workshop conversation, and then you take it into your next workshop conversation. And once you commit to that process, it's never ending. We're always going to learn from one another. We're always going to create knowledge with one another. We're always going to come up with new ideas for ways things can be done. It's exactly that never-ending process that creates the endless possibilities for change. Thank you.
Carry those words with me. Thank you so much, Mariana, for your work and for the work of other members of Gig Workers Rising in creating this toolkit for all of us. I want to turn now to Michelle Miller, who's the director of the Center for Labor and a Just Economy at Harvard Law School. Michelle, through your work, you interact with a wide range of unions, worker centers, and community-based groups. I'm sure a lot of those folks are thinking about how they might adapt or use this toolkit. Can you share, what do you see as some of the most exciting possibilities of the tool?
Yes, thank you so much. And I just really appreciate PowerSwitch and Gig Workers Rising for including me in this webinar and in this celebration of this incredible work. When I read through the toolkit over the summer, there were lights going off in my head about how many conversations I've had with people in various positions who were trying to make sense of the stories they were hearing about the changes that were taking place in many, many workplaces. And I think that this toolkit has the potential to help train people not in what to think, but how to think about the changes that are afoot. Some of the work that I'm doing over the coming year is research with clerical workers and business operations workers whose jobs are highly exposed to experimentation with algorithmic decision-making and artificial intelligence software. Will Nada's research on the proliferation of these bits and pieces of software that are being introduced into people's workflows is really showing up in those jobs. And these are workers who are on the precipice of working in gigified, subcontracted environments. They currently have stable working class jobs that are slowly being eroded and augmented by the use of software. And I think that the toolkit provides a way to start working with workers who are not yet in the gig economy, but have a future in the gig economy very soon. And to have those workers be really learning from gig workers about what those gig workers have already experienced and have some of the tools to push back. I also think that people in working class communities experience the impacts of algorithmic decision-making and gigification and through a number of other ways that they interact with the economy. So we know, for example, that renters have been facing market manipulation by companies like RealPage, which was using algorithms to help landlords set rent. And most low-wage workers are people who are living in rental housing. And so I think that when you start to build that capacity for people to think together about the trends that they're seeing, they are able to see those popping up in other parts of their lives. And then the last thing I would say is that we hear a lot from policymakers, from labor leaders, from people who are managing workers' capital and investing pensions, also trying to understand how these systems work. And I think that popular education is truly for everybody, and that if we are also training those people into how to ask the right questions and how to have the right levels of skepticism, we are also building their capacity to respond in the best possible ways to reports from McKinsey or employer side template legislation that is meant to balance the scales in favor of companies. So I just think it's amazing, and I'm really excited about it.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So before we move to the unrecorded part of our webinar, I want to just do a quick, very quick lightning round question with just one of our panelists. I'm going to call on Iha if that's okay, and then I want to make sure we have time for Q&A from our audience. So Iha, one thing that strikes me is the depth of the organizations that have contributed to or supported this toolkit in some way, right? We've heard from many today: app-based worker groups, Amazon worker groups, immigrants' rights groups, anti-surveillance, education groups, worker centers, unions, tech justice groups, the list goes on. Can you just talk quickly about why you think that is? What is it about our larger environment that these orgs and this toolkit is responding to? And maybe if you can speak to what's most important for all of us to keep in mind about this moment when it comes to something like pop ed, tech, and workplace justice.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I'll try to do it justice, but I'm not sure I can, because I think all the orgs have their own motivations and a very deep strategy around why they think this is important for them to engage around this. But I think, using the metaphor of seeds, one of the things that we're seeing is work is becoming increasingly atomized. We are all seeds being spread across so many industries, being forced to work alone and in individual spaces by ourselves. And so in that space, I think there's actually a very human connection, a drive to connect, to share our personal stories, to build a common narrative and analysis of the world that is really becoming important now, because work is very much datafied. And so as seeds, we're all going to sprout, we're all going to sprout on our own, but I think it works better if we are like recognizing that we're all kind of in the same situation.
Thank you so much, Iha. And since you did a lightning fast job, maybe if Ryan is available to also speak to that question, that would be awesome.
Oh, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question is just talking about the depth and breadth of the organizations that have been involved in this toolkit. Like, what is it about our larger environment that folks are responding to?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think there's a couple important pieces to say. One is that when you think about surveillance in our society, like the first places people often think about it is in policing. And there's been a lot of important work done there, connecting the policing of poor and working people and activists and Black communities through the policing of workers. And there's like a shared history behind that. So I think groups that focus on police surveillance and immigrant surveillance feel like a deep connection with people addressing those same issues in worker groups. And that was really important to our work. So that's maybe like, I think there's a lot to draw on between those organizations. And I think people individually feel this sense of like, this is about autonomy and control. People want to have freedom to make decisions, whether it's at work or in their lives. And if you're getting social benefits, or you're tied up in the carceral system, or you're a low-wage hourly employer, you feel like your autonomy is limited. And so I think there's this kind of urgency that Lauren spoke to earlier that's deeply felt.
Thank you for drawing those connections, Ryan. And it's so so true about the carceral system and economic justice as we think about it. I would like, if Lauren is available, I would like to get Lauren's quick thoughts on this question as well. And before I turn it over to you, I want to invite folks, we're going to move in a couple minutes to the Q&A portion, unrecorded Q&A portion of the webinar. So please feel free to open the Q&A function in the webinar and drop your questions there. But first, Lauren, will you share your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'm gonna return to that really beautiful metaphor that we opened with. And if we all think about what plants do, because it's things any of us gardeners on this call know this, we have to turn our plants sometimes, because what will start to happen is that they will lean towards the sun. And I think we're in a moment where we're seeing all of us not only wanting to dream of those other suns, but we're starting to lean towards them. And that shows up in ways, just all the examples we're seeing just in the last couple of weeks. We have seen Amazon workers do delegations across the country demanding better conditions at the warehouses. We are in the midst of watching both gig workers, Uber and Lyft drivers come together to coming up very soon, taking action together, but also creating a whole campaign demanding just and transparent deactivation system, and actually recently winning some concessions. So I think this is all about us yearning for something different, and that's showing up in multiple ways. I think we could tie the earlier to the year UAW strike to this as well. It is all of us leaning towards a different sun and leaning for something new and a new possibility. The other thing I think is important to realize is that we are not renters, workers, Amazon warehouse workers, data center workers, we are all of a people who are tired of having the powerful and the wealthy extract and just take from us and brutalize us in a million different ways. And we are all yearning for an economy and a political economy that recognizes the preciousness and dignity of all of us. And so we need to think about more ways to come together.
Thank you so much for that, Lauren. Lean toward the sun, y'all. I'm going to take that away from this, among other things. Okay, so we are going to move into the unrecorded portion of our webinar and to the Q&A.